Welcome on into another episode of Center Stage with Eric Wood. I am Josh Reed. Eric, a big one coming up on Sunday, the Bills, the Chiefs. This is the rivalry that the game that everybody kind of circles when the schedule comes out for the NFL before the season. But before we get to that, I want to look back real quick at the end of the Bills-Panthers game because we saw Dion Dawkins get into it with one of the Panthers players after the game. There was some pushing, some shoving. Dion ended up tossing his hat at him. Nothing came of it really. But the reason I bring this up is because this week you had Richie Incognito on your show. And that got me thinking, who are the three players that Eric played with, three former teammates, that if things went sideways, that he would go, I want those three guys with me if things go sideways. You got three guys. I'm assuming that Richie was probably at the top of the list.
Yeah, Richie probably. I may throw Dion in there just with his demeanor. Now he was a rookie when I played with him. I might throw him in there as well. Um, I don't know, like a Marshawn Lynch is sticking out to me.
What about guys on defense? Anybody on defense that was just nasty that was a teammate?
I mean, Kyle was pretty tough.
Yeah.
Assuming dad of five, plenty of dad strength, probably could defend himself pretty well. A sneaky one, which we always used to joke about this, would be Eric Pierce. Now, that's a guy like in the off season, he'd go kill hogs with, just a knife out there in the woods, and he'd send pictures of his off season excursions. Pretty quiet dude. And we're all like, does this guy have a secret life to him? Trying to think of like any like
well, you see
super
pictures.
tough one.
Speaking of that, you see pictures of like Trent Murphy now. Like this guy's like off the reservation, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that he's like living off the grid. Like you see him all the time. He's hunting. He's like gutting animals on his social media pages. So I look at him and go, well, that guy might be one of those guys you'd want. Is that the list though?
Yeah, probably. I'm trying to think back like early in my career, like a Kavika Mitchell, one of our linebackers, like big tough dude. I think he was like Hawaiian or Samoan descent, tatted up, like played with some tough ones, that's for sure. But I'd probably put Richie at the top of the list. And for guys that could potentially get in a post game scuffle, he would be up there right along with Dion. And a lot of times it gets chippy throughout the game, but look, the game's over and it is what it is. In Buffalo, with us having the same tunnel at times, that can cause some issues, but generally it all squashes after the game. But I guess when you rush the ball for over 200 yards and you completely lay into a defensive line the way they did, maybe it lingered.
Yeah, feelings were hurt for sure. All right, looking ahead now, Bills Chiefs coming up Sunday. Patrick Mahomes in this offense, they look right now as good the last 3-4 weeks as they've looked in a couple of years. What do you see from Pat in that side of the ball?
Yeah, they're really leaning into this pass game. I believe he's got the most passing yards in the NFL right now. They've gone over 28 points in the last 5 games, and really they've got their strength and the most explosiveness at receiver that they probably had in a long time with Rashee Rice coming back. They had Thornton going pretty early this season. Hollywood Brown was going, and then Worthy had been dinged up a little bit this year, but obviously we know he's a big time playmaker. And then Travis Kelce's having a heck of a year. He went for 99 and a touchdown last week and seems to be kind of on a resurgence track. He talked in the offseason about how he didn't want to hang it up after a season like last year, which he felt like was a disappointing season for him. It seems like he's got some juice back to him. So they look good offensively, and a lot of it's running through that passing game, especially if Pacheco can't play this week. I'd assume we're going to see a heavy dose of that pass game. And then Patrick Mahomes is doing a lot on the ground this year. He's averaging like 36 yards rushing a game. Usually he doesn't break that out till playoff time, but he's stealing a couple first downs a game with his legs, and he's playing really good football. A lot of times he does just enough in the regular season to get the job done. They don't try and show you too much in the regular season, or at least that's what they say. And then come playoff time, bet the over when it comes to Patrick Mahomes rushing yards, and he'll air it out a little bit more. But they're explosive right now on offense, and this Bills defense is going to have their hands full.
Yeah, I always find it interesting when the conversation comes up about quarterbacks who are really good runners. Obviously, Josh is always near the top of the list. But it's funny because Pat Mahomes doesn't get talked about enough, because it seems like when they need a big play, if he's got to use his legs, he has no problem, in particular, like you said, in a big game, in a big spot, in a big situation. So I think that could be something that fans should probably keep an eye out for in this game. If you're the Bills defense, how do you try to slow this offense down? What do you do?
You want to try and get them in obvious pass situations, and then you got to be able to get to the passer. Like we saw a week ago, Bills get 7 sacks, but a lot of that's because you put them in obvious pass situations and you got ahead. You had the game script right, and you got it to where that you knew they had to throw the football, and you get teams in a situation like that. This defensive line can get after you. So get them in obvious pass situations, limit their first and second down production, and then you got to be sound in the secondary. When they complete balls on the outside, get those guys down on the ground, and then prevent the big plays down the field. An offense like Kansas City right now, you're not going into the game saying, we got to shut this team out or let's hold them to 10 points. It's kind of keep them in check, limit the big plays, maybe try and force a turnover or two, and then really try and lock them down when they do get down in the red zone, because they're going to get yards. They're going to move the football. When they get down to the red zone, if you can get those stops, those are huge in a game like this.
I know that, and I'll probably add you to this list. I know a lot of the fellow guys covering the Bills was sick and tired of me hearing me talk about Michael Hoyt. When he comes back, I really think he's going to really be the spark that gets this defense into a flow. I know it's just one game, Eric, but man, the way they're able to move him around as a chess piece, especially with Ed Oliver being out now, they were able to do a lot of things with him. How good of a feeling do you have about Hoyt coming out of that first game?
I love his game. He stuck out to me last year with the Rams, and not just because he's big and he's in coverage sometimes, he's moving all over, but it's his motor and it's effort, and he's tenacious up front. And, we always say as an offensive lineman, it generally takes two guys getting beat to give up a sack. Well, that guy's rushing with such a high motor. He's putting pressure on the offensive line. Well, then you see him free up other guys to then go make plays in the backfield. But he adds an edge to that defensive line and that defense in general. I don't want to say we were completely missing it, but he adds an edge. He truly does up front for that Bills defensive line. I'm excited to see how they use him this week and moving forward, because if the Bills are able to get a lead, you can get creative with your fronts up front. And whether it was line games and movement, straight ahead rush, him pushing the pocket on the outside, using his power against the tackles for Carolina. That guy had a heck of a showing. And, a high effort guy like that, you expect it each and every week. I don't think that's a flash in the pan. Now, each and every week, is he going to have 7 QB pressures, a sack and a half, forced fumble? I mean, likely not. But he's the type of guy that's going to put a lot of pressure on an offensive line.
Yeah, you bring up the effort part of that puzzle when it comes to him. And, that's something that, you hear a lot of, they say defense travels. The effort travels. That never goes away. The effort's always there. Whether the outcome is or not, you don't know, but the effort is definitely there with him. We already talked about one of the marquee names, Patrick Mahomes. Josh Allen in this offense, not humming along like that offense is in Kansas City. How does Josh, with the way they're struggling right now to pass the ball, how does he walk that fine line of not pressing and trying to do too much? Because we've seen it at times in his career when he gets to that spot and he tries to force it a little bit. But, the other side of the coin is he's not getting that many opportunities. So when he does have it, you feel like he's got to try to take it.
I'd say at this point of Josh's career, and I'm not saying he was ever a big stats guy, but when you're early in your career and you're trying to prove yourself and prove that you belong in this league, prove that you're the franchise quarterback, at times you'll press because you're saying, look, I got to put up the stats. I got to put up the production, or else, I might not be the guy moving forward. I feel like at this point, all Josh cares about is getting rings. And so whether that's James Cook going over 200 and they beat a team 40-9, or he's got to do it himself in the second half like he did against the Ravens. coming out of the game, he's going to be fine either way. Now, I know he's frustrated by the passing game. He said so after the game last week, and he's talked about his footwork and how he's got to trust guys better. And it comes when you only throw the ball 19 times in a
Hmm.
game, twice were sacks, two were sacks on dropbacks. But when you throw the ball so limited, you miss a couple throws and those are amplified. When you maybe miss a guy that was open, it's amplified. When guys can't get open, other times everything's amplified when you have such a small sample size. Now, if they had to throw the ball more in the second half against the Panthers, maybe his stats are up there more. But to me, each and every season is different. We have a lot of continuity back from last year, but each and every season's different. And he's talking about trusting guys. Well, whether that's Josh Palmer coming back, trusting him more, learning more about Elijah Moore, leaning into Shakir more, leaning into Kincaid more, or finding ways to get Keon Galton, they got to figure that out because at some point, and it may be this week, a defensive coordinator is going to say, we're going to do everything we can to take away James Cook in this running game. Let's see what you got. And if that's the case this week, Kansas City's worst in the NFL against play action on the season. Their EPA is last in the NFL. And so if Spagnuolo, the defensive coordinator for the Chiefs, says we're going to take away this run game, Josh has got to be able to light them up. And I'm interested to see how they go about it and what matchups they truly want to take, because I do think, especially the linebackers for Kansas City, can be taken advantage of in coverage. That's part of the reason why they've struggled against the play action this year. So maybe a Dalton Kincaid game, maybe another Shakir game out of the slot.
It's wild to think that we're having a conversation, and I think it's the right conversation, where defensive coordinators may be game planning for James Cook and not Josh Allen. Like, that's just, I mean, the guy's the MVP. The guy's still one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, but I think that's also a statement of how well they're running the ball and how good they are up front in the run game. But it's just kind of crazy to think that that's kind of where this pass game is right now and spinning its wheels trying to find its way. Look, you mentioned the Kansas City linebackers. Let's talk about the Bills linebackers. Shaq Thompson missed practice on Thursday. Hamstring issue. Shaq's been playing incredible. Quite frankly, he's been their most productive linebacker this season. TB and Matt Milano been dinged up. They've been full participants at practice so far this week. How important is it to get those guys back in there, not only because what they can do, but because they've been on this stage. They know Pat Mahomes, and they know the Chiefs, and they kind of know the feeling of this big stage.
Yeah, and I also think they're our two best cover linebackers. You look at the Panthers last week, that's a downhill rushing attack. 2 out of the last 3 games, Dowdle goes over 200 yards from scrimmage. So they knew they were going to get a heavy dose, especially early in the game of the run game. Shaq Thompson, Dorian Williams can fill that role admirably at linebacker. You weren't that concerned about having Milano not in uniform. Terrell Bernard was dressed, but just in case of injury. And so this week, especially with the passing attack for Kansas City, I think it's big that those two guys are in there. The familiarity definitely helps, like you said. And then having both those guys healthy, if you can't get Shaq back for this game because of the hamstring, Dorian Williams becomes a great base defense option. I also think, similar to how they used Poyer on first and second down, and then you brought in Hancock to add some speed and athleticism to the secondary and obvious pass situations last week against the Panthers. I'm not saying you're going to do that with these linebackers, but it could be a deal where if these guys are a little banged up, you put Dorian Williams on the field maybe in a run situation, or as we've seen in the past, using a spy on Mahomes on third down. Maybe that's Dorian Williams. You bring in more of kind of a thumper and let him use his skill set of a blitzer, a downhill player. Maybe he comes in on the dime package. So it'll be interesting to see. And I'll be honest, I love how they mixed and matched the defensive personnel against the Panthers. Okay, let's get some of these young guys on the field. Hairston's back. We don't have to overtax him, but let's work him in some for Tre'Davious White. Jordan Poyer, tons of experience, physical downhill safety, still at this point of his career. Let's not just throw Jordan Hancock to the Wolves in his first action in a Bills uniform. Let's let him play to his strength on the back end of that defense with his speed and mobility back there. And so I'm interested to see how we continue to just find the right combination on defense, use guys' strengths and put them in the right spots. But I really, really liked what I saw from this Bills defense last week. It also, when you do things like that, it also allows you to almost hone in on the game plan situationally better to where Jordan Hancock is not necessarily concerned. I mean, he's got to be prepped in case Poyer goes down and he's going to be the full-time starter last week, but he could truly hone in on what do the Panthers do on third down this week. Okay, in obvious pass situations, who am I likely going to be matched up with? Where are they trying to attack in these zones? And for a young guy, that helps them digest the full game plan better.
Yeah, I asked Jordan Poyer this week about what that dynamic is like because, he's not in a situation this part of his career where, I mean, he's always been the starter. He's always been the guy, right? At least once he got out of Cleveland. I mean, he was the guy. Now all of a sudden you're kind of rotating, you're playing first and second down mostly, and then Hancock's coming in on third down. And I thought it was interesting because he said that they had great conversations on the sideline about, hey, this is what I'm seeing on first and second. What are you seeing on third? And almost so that Poyer could be his eyes on third down. So when Hancock's out there, Poyer's on the sideline watching and trying to diagnose what he's seeing and helping Hancock. I thought that was really interesting. It reminded me, those guys substituting in and out, reminded me a little bit of baseball when you bring the lefty in late in the game to face the left-handed hitter, and then he's out the next batter because the righty's coming in. I thought it was really – I give Sean and Bobby and the defensive staff a ton of credit because, you're midway through the season now and you're looking for answers at certain spots and to kind of creatively come up with an answer. Now, we'll see if it's the long-term solution or not, but I was really, really impressed with the way that kind of played out. And I love the point about Max Hairston because, Eric, to me, that speed, I would assume, maybe not, but I would assume that we see a jump even more in Max Hairston's playing time against Kansas City because that speed's going to be helpful against these Chiefs wideouts.
Absolutely. And when you looked at the playoff game last year against the Bills in Kansas City, they crushed us throwing the football. We could not keep up with them in man-to-man coverage. And as soon as we went zone, they ran RPOs. They got our linebackers down there hitting those quick hitters. So we had to run man-to-man defense. They're running crossing routes and rub routes, and we just couldn't keep up to them speed-wise. That's why you go out and draft Max Hairston in the first round. It's awful that he had to deal with the injury in training camp and couldn't get up to speed maybe to where you'd want him to for this matchup now. But you want him out there now, just understanding that you're likely going to see Kansas City in the playoffs again, and you want him to get out there and feel it. And I don't know how much he plays this week, and if it's similar rotation, heck, you could bring him in on third down and have him play some man-to-man defense out there on the outside for some of that speed. But when you look at Worthy and Hollywood Brown and Thornton on the outside, they got a ton of speed out there. And assuming that you're going to mix in a healthy dose of man-to-man coverage like we've seen more of this year from this Buffalo Bills defense, Harrison's going to play a vital role in that.
Trade deadline's coming up on Tuesday. I know Bills fans want the team to trade for every position that they possibly can. I'm going to ask you to channel your inner Brandon Beane and put the GM hat on for a second. What position do you think, maybe not specific player, but what position do you think would be most important for the Bills to add at the trade deadline?
I mean, just based upon depth right now, you'd say potentially defensive tackle. With Ed Oliver out, Daquan Jones with the calf injury, and just Dwayne Carter out for the year, TJ Sanders on final. I mean, you've just lost so many bodies there that if there's a guy at defensive tackle that you think could come in and be a difference maker down the stretch, potentially there. I know everybody wants receiver, but to me, it's got to be the right fit. I mean, you're not going to go out necessarily and get a big time number one receiver that everybody wants. And I don't necessarily even know that the Bills are going to brave that right now to add to this offense that's going to take a lion's share of the targets. But if you can get a guy, I mean, the most popular names, mainly because of who they play for and likely them moving on for some guys, could be Shaheed or Olave from from New Orleans. And either of those guys could come in, stretch the field. They add another burner on the outside. And so I would say there's your biggest two position groups right now that I think you would target. I just think, people have said safety, and I think it would be tough to kind of man the back end of the defense unless it was a former, guy who's played in this system before. And I don't know that any of those guys are out there right now that could come in and truly be a difference maker at this point of the season on the back end of that defense.
I'll give you a name at defensive tackle that I think is kind of interesting. It'd be a rotational guy, and he's a guy that knows the system. Harrison Phillips. He's with the Jets now. He's owed, I think, about $1 million on the rest of his contract. So financially, you could figure that out. And I don't think it'd cost you a ton. I don't think the Jets are sitting in a position where they're thinking, oh, well, we can't trade in the division because it's Harrison Phillips. It's not like Garrett Wilson. We're like, well, we don't have to face him, for the next 8 years. I think Harrison Phillips, though, would be a nice fit and a good rotational piece. To your point, I think safety, with seeing Poyer a little bit now and Hancock working back in and knowing that Rapp was dealing with the knee, that it wasn't by mistake that Sean made it a point to bring it up, that the knee goes back to training camp. So that clearly was impacting the way he was playing on game days. So I think you've got enough pieces there when Rapp gets back and gets healthy where you've got, Poyer and Hancock and Bishop and Rapp, that you've got some pieces there that I think you can kind of figure it out as you go. And it's all guys who know the system really well outside of Hancock, who's, a rookie and trying to learn it as on the go. Hey, around the league, final thing. Around the league, better shot at happening. The Colts get the number 1 seed or the Patriots win the division?
I will say the Colts get the 1 seed just based upon strength of schedule. Now, that was a team last year when the Bills were playing them in Indianapolis, and you're looking at the roster and you're like, man, they got a lot of talent on this team. They just don't have a quarterback. We played against Joe Flacco in that offense. He gave us a pick 6 on the first drive of the game for the Colts. But you're looking at that team saying, man, they got a lot of talent on this team. I would likely say Colts. The Patriots are doing some good things right now. I mean, just to be frank, Drake May's playing at a high level. They also are benefiting from coming in last in the division and playing a very weak strength of schedule. I'll take the Colts as the 1 seed as a better chance, though. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that as well, though.
Yeah, you know what? I think I agree with you. I think that their schedule's also not super tough. That division isn't exactly screaming with top-end teams. And I think I need to see a few more games still with Drake May. I do think that he's going to be a great quarterback. And I don't know for sure about their injury, how they've been banged up a lot, but I don't recall seeing a lot of like their bigger names and stars going down with injuries and where they've had to try to figure it out, if you will. So yeah, I think I'd lean where you're going. I think I'd go with the Colts as a better chance at getting that number 1 seed. Although, they're going to have teams, chasing them down, throughout the rest of the regular season. Eric Wood, this is one of my favorite conversations that I get to have every single week. Thanks so much for the time. Thank you for watching and listening to Center Stage with Eric Wood.
Yeah.